the Pope in prison, paper mache tiaras, and the potential deathbed conversion of one of history's most controversial figures. Spirit Inspire is starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello and welcome to another rousing episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, Erik Huff, and joined with me is my good friend and wonderful co-host, John Sohl.
Greetings and salutations.
Yeah, Isaac could not be here today. I know we always do a shout out on whoever's not here because it really does feel like a big piece of the puzzle is missing whenever
I agree.
Whenever one of the fellow co-hosts is out.
Well, especially for such an exciting episode like this.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So today we're going to continue on a series that John and I started a little while back where we talk a little bit about the history of the Archdiocese of Louisville and the transmission of the faith here.
Yes.
So if you recall the last time, John, we talked about kind of how the narrative works. I'm not a historian, not by trade, or I'm not even an amateur historian.
You just tell stories in a funny way.
Right. I just tell stories in a funny way. And I think of, there's a theologian, I think he's a Protestant theologian named Stanley Hauerwas. Have you heard of him?
I've not.
He was a big JP2 fan.
Cool.
Despite, like I said, I don't think he is a Catholic. I think he's still living. And Hauerwas' whole idea, he says, or one of the ideas that he has is about narrativity and how you can't really divorce the theology from the story. So the cross of Christ and the salvation of the world is all part of a story. Without Holy Week, without Easter, without the birth of Christ, without the story of Christ and him coming into the world, and even leading up to that, the typologies, all the stories of the Old Testament, the history of the world, because Christ is ultimately the author of history. Without all that, you can't have all these theological concepts. Right. They don't exist outside the narrative.
You can't take these stories in isolation from one another, because it's like if you looked at the story of Abraham being asked by God to sacrifice his only son Isaac and kill him, it's like, what a terrible God. Like, why would you do that?
It's a rough story.
Where you say the death of the firstborn of Egypt, and the Israelites being taken out of slavery, it's like, that's awful, right? Yeah. But if you don't understand the context, then you'll never grasp the significance or the reasons behind it or why God allowed certain things to take place through the evil that exists when human beings reject God, right? And so without that, you can't tell the story. There is no narrative, right? But with context, all of a sudden it becomes compelling, beautiful, and worthwhile, worth telling, right?
Yeah, amen. So
that's cool.
I do want to reiterate, again, it's not going to be a hypercritical, scholarly, historical romp, nor is it going to be flowers and rainbows. So there's certain elements of the story we're going to pick out. I think that I'm kind of an unusual fellow, would you say that? A little bit of an unusual guy. So maybe some of the elements that I pull out are unusual. It's not the straightforward story you would find in a history book. So I think last time we kind of talked about the cultivation of the city of Louisville and how it came to be and the geography around it.
Exactly. Bring me up to speed a little bit.
And that's
everybody
where
else.
We were at there. And, I think we could get to a point where we talk about the settlement of people here. We could talk about all those characters who traveled to the New World and founded the diocese. I think that would be the usual path it would take. However, I kind of want to focus on a person today. And that person is the person who founded the diocese from the top. I'm talking about the Holy Father. I'm talking about the Pope at that time.
All right.
And the Pope at that time was Pope Pius VII.
Okay.
And he's got a very interesting story. If I had a title for the episode today, I would call today's episode The Prisoner Pope.
Well, that's probably what the title's going to be.
Yeah, so there we go. There's the title already.
There you go.
So his papacy began in 1800. It ended in 1823. Our diocese was founded as the Diocese of Bardstown, April 8th, 1808.
Hey, that's my mom's birthday.
Is it really?
Yeah.
All right.
It's also Deacon Michael Schultz's birthday, as I recall.
Did he say that on the podcast last time?
No, he didn't,
Okay.
but I do remember. So if anyone knows, wish him happy birthday.
And it's the birth date of our diocese. So it was
exactly.
founded, like I said, by Pope Pius VII.
Very cool.
Now, we are the Archdiocese of Louisville. So, the diocese was eventually transferred in 1841, I think by Gregory XVI, and then later elevated from diocese to archdiocese. However, that isn't a new diocese. So the diocese that was founded in Bardstown is still technically this diocese. It was just transferred here. The name was changed, and then later was elevated to an archdiocese.
So other parts of the territory of the Diocese of Bardstown that were then named, like the Diocese of Knoxville or Chicago or other places.
I think they branch off later.
So they branch off later, so they wouldn't be considered extensions of the Diocese of Bardstown.
I think they were at one time, but this diocese is still that same diocese.
But if you go to the Archdiocese of Chicago or Knoxville or Nashville, and you look at when was their diocese founded, it wouldn't also be April 8th, 1808, right?
No. They broke it. They would have broken those bits off and started a whole new diocese from scratch. Whereas I think if you look at our diocese, the founding date would be that April 8th, 1808 date still.
Right, which I remember in high school when Archbishop Kurtz was first installed. It was like he was installed on the eve of the 200th anniversary. And birth of the Archdiocese. So there was a huge celebration. He traveled to almost every parish in the Archdiocese within his first year. And there was a massive celebration.
And this was 2008?
2008.
Okay,
yeah.
so that makes sense.
It was the beginning of my senior year of high school, I remember. Or actually, end of junior year. And so there was a delegation from DeSales that was allowed students to go to the celebration. I think it was over the weekend or something, at Louisville Slugger Stadium. And there were thousands of people at this that I remember, probably more than at the most recent installation of Archbishop Flaget.
Really?
I mean, the 200th anniversary is a big dang deal.
Yeah.
And so I just remember, again, I was 17 or so, and it was something beautiful to witness, something hopeful, and it gave me kind of a sense of significance within the Archdiocese of Louisville that, maybe not a lot of young people would have felt at that time,
Sure.
But to be able to be physically present there on the day of the celebration made me feel like I was caught up in a grander story. Even if I didn't know the story or understand the story, even if I felt a little frustration or tension as a misunderstood teenager normally would at that time in his life, right?
You were 36 at the time, though.
Ha 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 ha, no. But I don't know. It was pretty cool.
That's epic.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that. That's pretty cool. So that also confirms to me the 1808 date. As
exactly.
True. Yeah. So I mean, I think Memphis was under Paul VI. So that would have been probably the last 50 years becoming a diocese. And I think they would say that was founded by Pope Paul VI. However, our diocese would be that Pius VII foundation. He was a middle-class guy, kind of a noble family, but they were really middle-class. They weren't wealthy or anything. And he was kind of known as he came up through his episcopate as this was a time of revolution, right, in Europe. The French Revolution, we had just come from having Christendom and monarchies, and the whole social order is really getting overturned for the first time in a long time. And Pius VII, as a bishop, before he was elected pope, is kind of looked at, and these words now have different meanings, but I think some of the same connotations still apply. He's looked at as a progressive. He's looked at as being soft to democracy when a lot of people are into monarchs. So he's kind of this, I guess you could say, a progressive Democrat at this time. Not to say he's like, hey, we should have a bunch of revolutions, but he is meeting the world where it's at in some ways, whereas other bishops aren't, and saying things like, you can still be a good Catholic and be for democracy.
Sure.
You can still be a follower of Christ and see the needs of the individual person. which is kind of a developing idea. Obviously, he founded this diocese. He founded several dioceses here in North America under his reign. He's very open. Do you remember the whole Barbary pirates thing? Again.
When was that?
This would be back in the 1700s.
Yeah, vaguely. I
can't
remember.
Yeah, so I think they went and they, burned a bunch of ships. These pirates were off the coast of Africa, I believe, and they were enslaving people and capturing all these people. And I think this is how the Marine. I could be wrong here, so I'd like a real historian to watch. I think this is how the U.S. Marine Corps was founded.
Oh, wow.
They sent the Marines in for the first time ever, and they went and they just burned all these ships that they had stolen and burned all these pirate ships. And and so Pope, I think by this time he may have been Pope, maybe not, but he was very for that. He's like, man, America has done more for, the world than Christendom has done in hundreds of years, since Lepanto kind of thing.
Wow.
So, very kind of pro-America, to some degree.
Especially as committed as he was to establishing these dioceses, and he wanted to really grow the faith in the New World.
Yeah, right? And even addressing, democracy in America in these ways is a little bit out of the norm. So Pius VII, we're getting to the good stuff. This is at the time of Napoleon. And when he becomes elected and how the conclave that elects him comes about is the prior Pope, Pius VI, older Pope. He is taken prisoner by Napoleon to some degree, or is taken into custody.
Could you imagine today if Pope Francis was arrested and put in prison somewhere? What we would feel.
It's not a far cry. I mean, there's bishops under arrest even right now. So he dies.
Wow.
Away from Rome. I think that Napoleon, whenever he invaded Rome, I don't know if it was under Pius VI or the VII, but I had heard that he had taken all the good stuff and looted it and taken it back to Paris from Rome. And there's still someone on staff this may or may not be true. I've heard there's still someone on staff in the Vatican archives who's still trying to fix what a jumbled mess Napoleon made in the Vatican archives. It's still not right. So, Napoleon invades Italy, 1796. Pope Pius VI dies. I think there's a conclave around 1899 or 1799, 1800, and Pope Pius VII, Chiaramonti, is elected.
I was going to ask you what his name was.
Yeah.
Cool.
Barnaba Chiaramonti.
Barnaba Chiaramonti.
Yeah. So he's elected as the Pope in a very weird. So there's this San Giorgio monastery. It's an island off of Venice, and they elect the Pope there. I think because Rome's unsafe. And when they're there trying to elect the Pope, there's all these problems. The conclave is not coming together well. They're in a weird place. They almost elect at this time in history, an 85-year-old guy. So that'd be like electing Pope Francis, who's been Pope already for 10 years. Pope now, in this age, it's about the time I think that Benedict XVI retired from the papacy.
Right.
It's way too old. So I like to think of it as the Three Little Bears kind of situation. Goldilocks, the Three Bears.
Yeah.
Where this one's too old, this one's too young, this one's too German, whatever the problem.
Right.
Whatever the problem is. So they eventually come up with Pius VII, Chiaramonti, and because Napoleon had raided the Vatican, there's no papal tiaras, which they still used at that time.
Wow.
So they have to make one. And they make it out of paper mache.
No way.
Yeah, they make a paper mache tiara. And Venice, very rich, right? So all the nobility of Venice, they chip in their jewels. So there's actual jewels on this paper mache tiara.
Wow.
And if you look at it, it still exists. It's in a museum. And Yeah, it's pretty cool that they made this out of paper mache on the fly.
When I think of paper mache, I think of pinatas my mom helped me learn how to make with a balloon, with all the goo on it.
It's not too far from this.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So he immediately, he comes into power as the Holy Father, and immediately is making concessions to this French government. So, the monarchists and stuff, again, they're not too excited about this.
Sure.
And, he gave up all claims to church lands that were taken after 1790. Sundays reestablished as a festival, effective on Easter Sunday. And he's trying. It reminds me of Pope Francis in some ways, where early on, or even now, we've had this deal, and it's not just Pope Francis. I think this started with JP2 and into Benedict's reign, is with the Chinese government. And people are very critical, and they're like, it's a bad deal. I think the Vatican's come out and said as much recently. But it is trying, what can you do? I mean, if you come down too harshly, it's a very difficult balance.
Yeah, because you're dealing with persecution. You're dealing with people wanting to live their faith, practice their faith. You're dealing with potentially causing more harm and more martyrdom as a result of poor decisions. And so you got to be tactful, diplomatic, and trusting that God is working even through difficult dynamics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So some of those criticisms, it's funny how history repeats itself. Some of these criticisms that you see people make about Pope Francis today, they're making almost the identical criticism to Pope Pius VII, somewhere around 1800. So, 223 years ago, we're hitting the same notes.
It's the same kind of thing that you may have heard people say about John Paul II during his papacy, right? I mean, if we had had Twitter and social media the way we have today when JP2 was first becoming Pope, all the initial changes and waves of growth and expansion that he did for the church, a lot of people could have painted a totally different picture of him than what ended up happening, right? Because of all the criticisms. But people still had criticisms. It doesn't change. It's just funny how that works in history.
Yeah. So at this point, he's still trying to make it work, I guess, with Napoleon and everything going on in France. And
I can imagine dealing with Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oh my gosh. And so the Roman Curia, they are like, no, you cannot go to the coronation of Napoleon in Paris. Like, don't do it. And he does it anyway, and he goes. And there's this famous David, the coronation of Napoleon.
Yeah.
And it depicts, a seated pope and Napoleon crowning his wife. But what really happened was the pope was going to crown Napoleon. Napoleon took the crown and crowned himself. Kind of, Napoleon's thought of this Antichrist figure often, like a great Antichrist. And,
that's profound.
It's a very, kind of prideful move. So he takes the crown and he puts it on his own head. And then that's not the end of it. There's a very weird and tumultuous relationship between the two. So, Napoleon starts offering gifts and donations to the Pope, which the Pope generally refuses. But Napoleon gives him this, it's called the Napoleon Tiara, with some of the jewels that he had taken from the previous ones. He puts in this one and gives it to him. But it's really kind of funny. It's deliberately made to be too small to fit on your head. So it's like a joke. It's an insult.
Wow.
He also commissioned a beautiful portrait of Pius VII, which is if you see an image of him, it'll probably be in the thumbnail for this video. It's the image generally used for Pius VII.
That Napoleon had commissioned.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's super
God works through all kinds of people, right?
It's super weird.
Of course.
And Napoleon has this uncle, Cardinal Fesch. Have you ever heard of him? So there's kind of an intermediary between Pius VII and Napoleon.
I mean, you got to realize, Erik, I grew up not ever hearing this story, this history. And the Archdiocese of Louisville, maybe many of us, I can't speak for everyone in the Archdiocese, but I feel like I speak for a lot of us, that maybe we just don't know our story. We don't know our origins of what was the cultural context? What was the governmental situations, not just in America, but throughout the world? What was the leadership dynamic that led to the birth of our diocese within our country? And how did that affect the leadership, the dynamics, the disposition of the faithful in this area that then led on to all the families and generations? It affects us even today, even if we don't know it on a subconscious level. And I didn't grow up hearing this story, right?
Sure.
So there are people and things that you're talking about. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And it's not a history lesson to me. It's more of learning my story. And it's very compelling to me. So thank you. So if I say I've never heard of this person, don't feel I'm just like, wow, this is amazing.
Cardinal Fesch had all this artwork.
Yeah.
And you'll see this, I'm sure, I mean, there's probably paintings here in this building that might have been donated. So a lot of the bishops and priests who came to the New World, who were in this part of America, would go back and request money. And obviously Fesch, being Napoleon's uncle, was in a pretty prominent position in France. And so they go and beg him for money, and he has a huge collection of artwork. So it's kind of funny, he gives this artwork as a gift to these dioceses. So you get to these Bardstown, whatever, Cincinnati today. These are dioceses out in the wilderness, out in the woods, and people are bringing these masterpieces, giant paintings out into the wilderness.
I can't imagine.
That beauty.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. And these works still exist. There's one that's called Christ's Triumphal Entry into Jerusalem in Cincinnati. It's at the Athenaeum at Mount St. Mary's of the West. As you kind of go into their atrium right in the middle there on the right. I forget who the painter was, but I know I think Dickens or Mark Twain or something. It's a pretty cool painting. I think it has contemporaries of that time, like Voltaire and stuff in it.
Yeah.
And Fesch had given that to Cincinnati Diocese, which kind of came about under Pius VII around the same time period. And I think Dickens had seen this painting, and when he saw the painting, he was like, whoever this artist was, he's like, he should go do something else. He hated this painting. So I like the painting not only because it's huge and a cool work of art. I think I've said this previously on the podcast. My judge of art, and my judge as an art critic, is how big it is. So the larger the painting, the better it is, in my opinion. So I have
It's not always accurate though.
Yeah, well, for me it is.
Right,
I'm okay, the bigger it is. I've seen The Night's Watch in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and it's huge. I'm like, great painting.
Amazing.
The girl with the pearl earring,
Yeah.
very small, bad painting. Okay, hate it. So the larger the painting,
So Mona Lisa, what would you think?
I probably, if I saw it, I think
Three
it's
Bears, maybe.
it's moderately sized. It's not
But
big.
not just right.
It's not just right. Just right for me is huge. Washington crossing the Delaware. I saw that in the Met.
It's
I turned
huge,
the
right?
corner. It's massive.
I think that's a great painting. Yeah.
Great painting because it's massive.
Okay.
I only like a painting if it's a giant painting. Okay?
Oh my gosh. Crystal and I were in D.C. last year after going to a Theology of the Body course together in Pennsylvania. So we stopped by D.C. and just decided to see some things. My goal was, I've always wanted to see the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And every time we get there, it's closed or you can't get in, you have to reserve. I've never been able to see it with my own eyes.
Sure.
I guess I missed that 8th grade field trip. We went to Chicago instead. But anyway, we couldn't get in there, so we decided, well, what's around? And the National Gallery of Art was there, and we could get in for free, just walk right in. And
Sure. That's a
gosh,
great
we
place.
spent 2, 3, 4 hours walking through painting, and we didn't even see half of it, it felt like.
Yeah.
And even when the things we did see, it was it's overwhelming, the wealth and treasure trove that we have, provided you take it in the right doses and don't look at art as just all the same, just because it's classical or traditional painting styles, large or small. Everything can draw you in if you just spend a time with it and let it point you to something beyond. So to me, your image of the wilderness and these massive, beautiful paintings that were brought into the wilderness, right? if you've ever felt in a desert, if you've ever felt like you're in a wilderness to some extent, and then someone brings beauty, goodness, truth into your life, into your desert, then that has an opportunity to awaken a new world, open up horizons that were before impossible to even conceive of, to even believe were out there. And so that gives you a sense of wonder and desire to explore new territories and to deepen your understanding of yourself and your own story. So in the same way, them taking these paintings into the wilderness 200 years ago or more, to me speaks of the what symbolism that is for us in our diocese, so that we can see a different picture, gain a better perspective of our story, not just where we came from, but ultimately where we are and where we're heading, so that we can tell an even better story and be more fruitful, and in some ways maybe reclaim a heritage that we feel lost, retrieve some of these beautiful stories and details that on some level maybe have been lost, or they're so scattered we just didn't know where the pieces went. It's like a puzzle that you just dropped all the pieces. Where'd they go? And it takes a long time to retrieve and recover them, but when you do, you can now put this portrait back together, and suddenly you inspire the next generation and give people hope, especially when a lot of difficult things have happened in the last few years.
Yeah.
Man,
So
keep going.
All right. So the relationship obviously is weird, if not tumultuous from the beginning, between Napoleon and Pius VII. Pius VII tries to make it work. I think eventually he stands up and it doesn't work. So Napoleon has him arrested. And he captures him and takes him back to France. He's exiled for 6 years. Suffers greatly during that time. It's a well-known thing. Hence the title of the episode, The Prisoner Pope. Pretty much on house arrest in various places. And I mean, you can read all about this. There's plenty of materials out there where you can see the details of Pius VII's exile. Of important note during that time, though, I would say, is on the Feast of the Assumption. It was recorded that while Pius VII was celebrating Mass, he entered into a trance and he began to levitate in a manner that drew him to the altar. And this wasn't just seen by like faithful Catholics. So the French soldiers who were guarding him saw this and were in awe and disbelief by what was transpiring. Like, it was an absolute miracle. Again, miracles that happen during your lifetime don't count towards canonization. So
I thought they did. I thought if you had one during your lifetime and then two after your death.
I think they all have to be after you've passed, so that it shows that you're interceding from heaven. Is how I understand
that's cool. But regardless, how often do you hear this about popes having levitation experiences? You know?
Right. You rarely hear any of these things happen in the lives of the saints at all.
Right.
And you rarely hear lives of the saints with popes. Maybe the first 30 or so
were
martyrs.
They were all saints and martyrs. Right?
Saints and martyrs. But after that, we start talking about papal tiaras and all these fine jewels and cardinal feshes and stuff like that, you start to see this saintly character of popes less and less. So he did a lot, though, despite being exiled, despite being the imprisoned pope. He is a servant of God now. Pope Benedict XVI elevated him as servant of God, so there's no impediment towards his canonization process. Like I said, there were miracles in his lifetime that had happened, and he did suffer greatly. So as servant of God, Pius VII, he would be the patron of prisoners for that reason. Because he was, how many popes are imprisoned too?
Right.
Especially in later years. So, I know 1800, 1807 or whatever doesn't seem that
compared
recent.
to 2,000 years, we're still talking about the last 20%.
Sure.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty tough. Some other things is because he's in exile, it's like for him to get papal documents out there to the people, it's very hard to do if you're under arrest and you're imprisoned, but he still managed and found ways to communicate out his messages to the world despite his imprisonment, which is absolutely amazing in my opinion.
That's proof the Holy Spirit works even
Yeah.
through these crazy moments in the church's history.
And
Wow.
he canonized, many people. I think the most famous of which is, well, not many, probably like 6 or so, but the most famous of which, St. Angela Merici,
Oh, really?
founder of the Ursuline Sisters.
Wow.
And during this time, going back to America and those devotions, so I work at Holy Angels Academy, and our chapel is named after Our Lady of Prompt Succor. Have you ever heard of this devotion?
I have. I just don't know a whole lot about it.
Yeah, again, there's going to be a lot of this. We're going to get back to another devotion of Our Lady associated with Pius VII. If there's a devotion to Our Lady and you've never heard of it, a lot of times it's related to Pius VII, and we'll get to why here in a little bit. It does have to do with the imprisonment and exile and then his return to Italy. But this Our Lady of Prompt Succor image ties back into both of the two things. First, the Ursulines, and secondly, it ties into him being able to communicate from the confines of his imprisonment. There was a sister, I think it was like Sister St. Michael or something, and she was in France, and she was an Ursuline, and she wanted to join, I think it was a relative or a biological sister, not just a religious sister Ursuline, but also a religious sister Ursuline,
Sure.
who was in Louisiana at the time. And so she asked her bishop if she could go to America, and he said that she would have to have permission from the Holy Father, which seems like a tall task even today.
Yeah.
Like to be like, oh, you have to ask the Holy Father. But at this time, it's even
Because he's in prison.
he's in prison. And so she prayed to this Our Lady of Prompt Succor devotion and said she would establish this devotion in the New World if she went to Louisiana, and Our Lady made this happen. And she got a response from the Pope, Pius VII, in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Could you imagine getting
That's
a response
unheard
from
of.
Pope Francis in 2
In
weeks?
2 weeks, even today.
Yeah, and
right?
imagine if he was in jail. And imagine if there was no electronic email. Imagine if there's no postal service in the modern
Imagine if
sense.
you barely even had electricity.
There's
if that.
No
right?
electricity, yeah. So it's absolutely insane.
Wow.
So she goes, develops this devotion. There's this huge fire in New Orleans. They pray, Our Lady of Prompt Succor, hasten to help us. And the Ursuline convent is spared from this. I think that Andrew Jackson, our very not Catholic president, during the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans, before the battle, he prayed in front of the image. And then after the victory, it was the first place that the messenger ran into the church and told them. And then Andrew Jackson prayed in front of Our Lady after the battle, which is just insane to me.
What?
After the victory. And she's crowned,
Wow.
for the winning of that battle. Again, kind of related back to Pius VII because he was able to respond to this in prison.
Dude, and the War of 1812 was like that war that came about 20, 30 years later, basically on some level after Britain had regained their troops and reclaimed their losses. And it was almost like this attempt to go back and reclaim what they felt they had lost in the Revolutionary War. And Francis Scott Key, as far as I know, famous for writing the Star Spangled Banner, was basically talking about this definitive victory 20, 30 years after the Revolutionary War of our independence and that sense of stability within our governmental structure, our foundational principles, and ideally, as far as we feel deeply, our Christian principles. Sure. And for Andrew Jackson to pray in front of Our Lady of Prompt Succor before and after these critical battle like this only reinforces these Christian principles, especially devotion to Our Lady in relation to Christ, who brings all of that salvation. And that's at the heart of our founding existence of our country. Not just the Archdiocese of Louisville, Diocese of Bardstown and that story, but it's somehow it feels like there's that connection between the founding of our own diocese and the redemption and salvation of our entire country.
Yeah.
and a reclamation of our own story
Yeah.
nationally.
And like I said,
Wow.
even though he's pro some elements of
Sure.
America, there's other things like slavery, where he's extremely critical, extremely strong stance on. I mean, you'll see the first pope to, I think he goes way far back with popes condemning slavery, but I think Pope Pius II, you'll see him using strong language too. But Pope Pius VII says, he wrote letters to all these governments, especially the Catholic ones and the monarchs, talking about his regret that this still exists, having believed that it had ceased, and he begs and begs that these governments implement all their authority and wisdom to extirpate this unholy and abominable shame. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So he was also, so we don't know with saints that in history, if you go back, there was probably a lot of them that were black. St. Augustine, potentially, St. Simon the Cyrenian,
Really?
Yeah, there's no way
I didn't even think about that.
There's no way to tell for sure.
Sure.
Obviously, like a lot of these characters, the Ethiopian eunuch in the Bible, very early on, very early baptized.
And a lot of sacred art, because of when it was written and the culture it was, or painted, things like that may not have depicted it as effectively because the context of the culture, the language, the
and
country.
also if it's painted in like somewhere in the middle of like Germany, like they've never seen anybody who doesn't look like a bunch of Germans.
Exactly.
So
got to keep that in mind.
So anyways, Pius VII, though, he canonized the first black person officially. So like that we know for sure.
Pius the Seventh.
Yes, did back then. So it was Saint Benedict the Moor.
Cool.
Yeah, so he did that as well.
That's profound.
Among other things too, once he returned from exile, he's the one who implemented that white and yellow flag that we have today. So that still stands, yeah. So a lot of what he's doing is really affects the church and its outlook on other human persons. It's a very universal outlook coming from Pius VII. His relationship with democracy. But when he did come back from exile, he wasn't as much of a pushover, so to speak, as he was before. It probably hardened him some and maybe had some spiritual experiences. I think he brought back the Inquisition and the list of banned books, and he kind of toughened up a little bit too, maybe rightfully so. But he also thanked Our Lady for allowing him his freedom. And he went to all the different shrines and local shrines post-exile and had a devotion to like all of them. So it was pretty special. So that's why you see a lot of different maybe titles of Our Lady you've never heard being associated with Pius VII, even if they're older than him. So even despite the exile, despite all this contentious relationship with Napoleon, he always referred to him as my dear son still. And later he would add a somewhat stubborn son, but a son still. And he ended up having to excommunicate Napoleon later on. But when Napoleon was in his exile, St. Helena, the Pope wrote to the British government. He asked for better treatment for the former emperor, for Napoleon. And he said, he can no longer be a danger to anybody. We would not wish him to become a cause for remorse. And I think because of Pope Pius VII's relationship with Napoleon, with his great love for him and his treatment, despite the ill treatment that he received in return, I think that this was beneficial. Napoleon reconciled with the church. He asked for a chaplain on his deathbed. He said that it would rest my soul to hear Mass. The Pope petitioned the British to allow this and sent a priest. On April 20th, 1821, Napoleon told a general, I was born in the Catholic religion. I wish to fulfill the duties it imposes and to receive the succor it administers. He affirmed his belief in God. He read aloud the Old Testament, the Gospels, and the Acts of the Apostles, and he died on the 5th of May, 1821, after receiving the sacraments of confession, extreme unction, and viaticum in the presence of a priest.
I have never in all my life heard anything like this about Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, me either. So maybe we need some fact check on that.
Yeah, maybe so, and that's all well and good, but I also would recognize the possibility. We live in a world of misinformation, fake news, propaganda, a lot of confusion, and so much information overload that it's hard to tell what's true and what's not in some ways.
Sure.
It makes me wonder, and because this is how Satan works. He divides and conquers. He adds distraction so as to literally disperse. He scatters, right? And so if his entire goal is to scatter us into dens of collective isolation from one another, where we feel lost and afraid in a wilderness, right?
Yeah.
Where we're easy prey.
Sure.
If that's his goal, which we all know it is, then it would make sense that something this important about the salvation of someone that many people would see as unforgivable, right? I mean, it would be like true information coming out that at the very last moment of Hitler's life, he had a profound conversion from verified eyewitness accounts, right? I'm not saying that's the case or anything like that even happened.
Sure.
But how hard would that be for people to believe or accept?
Sure. I mean, even the Napoleon thing's a little bit tough for me. So
yeah, absolutely. Did that actually happen?
I've never heard it. Yeah.
Right.
So that was a first when researching for this episode. So I'd like to see some more evidence and some more information on that.
And if anybody in the audience wants to do some research and give us some information, like, please send us some comments, right? Send us an email, give us something, because these stories, these facts are very critical that we substantiate.
And there's also a book about the nature of this relationship that's very thick that came out in 2021 by Ambrogio Caiani called To Kidnap a Pope. And it is a huge resource. Couldn't read through all of it before this episode, but definitely that's where I'm pulling some of these facts from. And very good read. I'd recommend that to anyone. I did want to talk about the relationship. Maybe we can take a quick break.
Yeah, let's
get back to it. But
let's do it.
When we get back, I want to talk about not just the relationship between Pius VII and this history to the Archdiocese, but Pius VII and the history of our podcast and where he falls into place there a little bit. So we'll be back with more Spirit and Spire in just a moment. Welcome back to Spirit and Spire. I'm your host, Erik Huff, joined with John Sohl.
What's up?
We've been
Again.
talking about Pope Pius VII, the Holy Father that founded our Archdiocese here in Louisville, Kentucky. Originally the Diocese of Bardstown, transferred, elevated, same diocese. And we talked about, its foundations in our history here as the city of Louisville, as the Archdiocese of Louisville, and the relationship to Pius VII. We've talked about his relationship with Our Lady and the different devotions to Our Lady, our Blessed Mother. Kind of wanted to tie this all back together and talk about the relationship between Pope Pius VII and one of those devotions to the Blessed Mother in this podcast. I don't want to go into too many details right away because that would be too much of the history of the podcast and how it got started. And I would want Isaac and maybe even Brian to be here for that.
We should bring Brian back. It'd be great.
And we do need to do a little bit of a history lesson on how the podcast started. But one key or critical element of that is one of our patrons is called Our Lady of the Reform. Mm-hmm. And I have an image of which that started that right here. And I'd like to talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
So let's take a look. So we have the image. Let's hold it up first. Get a good picture of it. So this is Our Lady of Reform. And I found this at a Goodwill.
Really?
By St. Martin of Tours, Catholic Church. The Goodwill off of Broadway. You familiar with it?
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Wow.
It's a good Goodwill. And I saw it, and first it's a striking image of Our Lady. It's beautiful. It looks like nothing I've seen before. But I noticed this beautiful frame that it was kept in.
Frames go a long way when it comes to sacred art.
Yeah, and this was around the time we were starting this podcast.
Yeah.
And starting to talk about it. So it weighs pretty heavily into our lore as Spirit and Spire also. But on the back, I turned it over to see who framed it. It was Bluegrass Frames, by the way. Shout out if they still exist.
Yeah.
But I wanted to see who framed it because it seemed like there's money. And on the back, there's a letter from Leonard E. Boyle, the prefect of the Vatican Library, talking about the history of this image. And if you don't mind, John, I'm going to read this for the audience here.
Yeah, do it.
And also, the names mentioned on here, if someone knows who these people are, I'd love some more information on this and how this ended up where it was. So
Help us out, people.
it says, Dear Mr. Hall and Miss Holcomb, thank you for your letter of the 25th of July. This was written on the 7th of August, 1995. And for the print of this Madonna della Riforma, which has been in my family for over 200 years, is the claim. Various members of the staff of the Vatican Library have examined the print, which dates in origin from the pontificate of Pope Pius VII. This exact print that I'm holding here is from Pope Pius VII's reign, 1800 to 1823, which we talked about earlier. Although we have not found any evidence of a grant of a plenary indulgence from Pius VII in respect of the Madonna of the Reform. It is our opinion that this painting on zinc is a copy of some painting somewhere in Sicily, and that it was done by an amateur painter, probably at the request of a member of the Ruffo or Cassano family, in thanksgiving for some favor or grace received. I would assume it's Pius VII's return from exile. This is just me making an amateur guess on a podcast. Not arguing with Father Leonard E. Boyle OP here, who is a genius and the first American to be the prefect of the Vatican Library, whose handwriting I have right here before me.
That's amazing.
For some special favor, grace received. So the painting would not have had anything to do with the Vatican. Well, sure. Hang on to it all the same. It is now almost 200 years old. Now it is, I think, 200 years old for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Next year, we're 100% sure if it's between 1800 and 1824. So by next year, this will definitely be 200 years old. And though amateur and of no artistic value, that's a little harsh, Father Boyle.
Compared to some of the stuff we see today.
It is a marvelous tribute to and in memory of the devotion of the Ruffo Cassano family of Palermo. Yours sincerely, Leonard E. Boyle, OP, Prefect, the Vatican Library. So, pretty spectacular. Pope Pius VII, starting with me finding this image because I didn't know anything about him at all prior. Wow. Shamefully so, right?
Yeah.
You hear a lot about Pope Pius V. Get a lot about the Pope Pius X crowd.
Yeah.
Pius V is the one who implements Trent.
Right.
And, the Tridentine liturgy and all those sorts of things. He's known for. Pope Pius X is known for lowering the age for communion. He's like, he makes a lot of reforms.
Oh, yeah. Right. That was in the early 1900s. Right?
Early 1900s. Yeah. I think, doesn't he die when he hears that World War I is breaking out? Like, he just dies.
So, something like that.
And he's a saint. So,
right.
A more modern saint, Pius X. Pius V is a saint too, Saint Pius V.
Makes sense.
So both are saints, but Pius VII kind of falls in between the two, right?
Yeah.
He gets slept on, I think. Even though he has this marvelous story, this crazy relationship with Napoleon.
And again, he was pope for 23 years. I mean, that's a long papacy.
He was a pretty young pope, too. When you look at the image of him, he looks like a very young pope, even after his exile and all of this, how it's worn on him. And it did wear on him physically. So I felt like there was a time in my life when I first started back at the Athenaeum where Pope Pius VII, he was just popping up all the time. So I had this image and I brought it up to you guys. That's kind of the start of the podcast, and started this devotion, Our Lady of Reform. Started to do a little bit of research of Pope Pius VII. Like, I saw this like image of this mural where it has like the whole church. The thing that stuck out to me in one corner is like there's Pope Pius VII in exile, and he's just distraught in this picture of the history of the church, and stands out. Just the saints that he canonized that kept popping up. There's a Saint Hyacinth that he canonized. We've already talked about Saint Benedict the Moor, Saint Angela Merici. Very specific to him. Even contemporaries that became saints later. Like, I saw this statue, and it said Blessed Gasper. Like, all the other saints around were very specific.
Yeah.
And this one was Blessed Gasper. So it would be like Saint Joseph.
And
Blessed Gasper. And it's like, who is Blessed Gasper?
Right.
And then I found this relic in Cincinnati too, at the Holy Spirit Center later on. And he was a friend and messenger and contemporary of Pius VII. Like I said, at the school I work at, we have this devotion that's heavily related to Pius VII. The diocese here is founded by Pius VII.
Right.
The diocese that I'm from in Cincinnati
also
is founded by Pius VII. So he just keeps coming up, at least in my life.
Yeah.
And hopefully he starts popping up in other people's lives too, because he's, I think, an amazing person. I think that, the history would be kind to him. And I think he's a saintly man.
Well, I think of, starting a new diocese is no different than starting a new church, and you think of the apostles in the early church right after Pentecost. They were called, the Great Commission, go make disciples of all nations. And so Israel suddenly becomes a blessing for the entire world. That's why they were chosen. Yeah. And so these apostles, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, to fulfill the longings of Abraham and Moses and all the prophets, these incredible men courageously went out into the wilderness of the world to spread the news of Christ's resurrection and to establish churches, which in the early church, people might have, when you're reading like the church in Ephesus, the church in Corinth, right? You think of, I guess they, opened up a building and, people came to church there. And I wondered to myself, did they? Or did they go there and establish a presence, a community of followers and leadership and infrastructure so that there wasn't just one building set up in Corinth or Ephesus, but there were multiple parishes, and the church they're referring to is the diocese. And so for Pius VII to build and add to that number and establish these churches, these dioceses, is taking part in the greater story of the entire history of the church, by which Pentecost continues to propel us forward. And so the Holy Spirit hovered in the beginning over all the chaos of nothingness and the abyss before creation. To me, it's no wonder that Pius VII was imprisoned for 6 years. And if you take each year as a day of creation, all of a sudden, on the 6th day, he's released and entering into the rest of the story, or into the rest of God's glory, by which so much fruit came, both before his imprisonment, of course, as he attempted to, establish these churches and begin this process, but even more so after the fact, as he deepened that commitment and the lasting legacy that has come forth from his pontificate. But obviously, in our diocese, people don't know the story well enough. They don't know, when you say obscure names like Pius VII, Pius V, Pius, whatever, Gregory the...
I think we mentioned ourselves. Pius II in here too.
Pius II, right. You can name all these popes. It's like, okay, that's great. A bunch of names, a bunch of dates. It reminds me of history class. It can get really boring. I memorized all this stuff and took the test and I forgot about it after that, right? So I could get my grade and get out. But really the point of this to me is learning our story, learning our heritage, and reclaiming the dynamic narrative, the incredible, compelling plot, the inspiring play, or Theo-Drama, as I've heard it said, that we are a part of, that you can actually contribute to and make a difference in.
Yeah. I'd say like what this tells me, and part of why we're doing this too, is it's not just a story. This isn't us just trying to go back and show something about history or to push some sort of agenda, which is common these days.
Right.
No matter who you are, there's these agendas. The only agenda I want to drive home is that Jesus Christ is the Lord of history. He's had an amazing plan for everyone who's ever lived. He's had an amazing plan for their lives, whether they be Pius VII or St. Benedict the Moor or St. Angela Merici. And he has an amazing plan for your life. And these people didn't just live happy lives. Like, God didn't just raise them up in easy times or easy circumstances. And history wasn't very straightforward, black and white. It was messy. It was complicated. It was often tragic. It might have been more complicated and more tragic than these times now. Who knows? Things in the world ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. And God was still present. He was still the author of this history. He had an amazing plan for their lives, and he has an amazing plan for the life of each one of us here today. And sometimes, like we said, these histories hit similar notes. I'd see a lot of parallels between Pius VII and Pope Francis. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of parallels between what's happening in the world now and some of the issues and some of the issues that Chiaramonte tried to address in the time when he was alive. So have trust and faith in God's providence and the story that he's trying to tell. And I think there's so much noise and distraction and, like I said, agenda-driven narratives.
Yes.
That if you're just quiet and you listen to God and then try to live that story, your story, that he wants you to live. What do the young people say this now? Main character syndrome. I think that's true. I think that's fair to say. Pope John Paul II says, the man is not a means to any end, that in and of himself. That's where his value is derived, just from his very being. And that's the same of all people. So yeah. I would like people to look at their lives in that manner.
Right, but not to put ourselves at the center of the universe, right? As we know, there's the Theo-Drama and then the ego drama. Yeah. And when we put ourselves as the main character in our own story and not Christ within us, then suddenly we can devolve into whatever suits our fancy, whatever thing we think is important and exciting.
We have our own agendas too. It's not just exterior.
Right,
it's
and
interior.
So when we let our ego get in the way, then the drama becomes dramatic in a not good way.
Yeah.
The emotional drama, the drama that's boring and empty and filled with anxiety and fear, instead of adventure and hope.
Yeah, Christ came to give life and to give it more abundantly. That's one of his promises. Another one of his promises is seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. So yes. That's a good place, I think, to end it.
I'm all for it.
All right.
What a great story, Erik. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. And do you think we'll need a part 3 to continue the story into the?
I don't even think we've really even started on to how the Archdiocese started.
Exactly.
We're not
this
even
is all
there.
Foundational stuff. The story has to start with all the context,
sure.
the culture.
I think next week we'll start with there was this garden.
Right. Well, we've done that a few times.
A couple of times.
That's so good. Well, thanks, Erik. This is great, and I'm looking forward to next time.
All right, me too. Me too, John. All right, we'll see you guys next time with more Spirit and Spire. Servant of God, Pius VII, pray for us.